Hey Jay, hey Zach, welcome to the Stark Reflections podcast.
Hey, Mark, how's it going?
It
Hey,
is
Mark.
awesome. I'm so excited to get you guys here because you guys are normally all over the world with different authors, and I get to hang out with the two of you in this virtual space. I want to first talk about the collaborations you guys have done. You guys have written several different series, a lot of post-apocalyptic. How did you guys actually connect, meet up, and start writing together?
That's Zach's answer.
Yeah. It's pretty. So I was a fan of Jay's when I first got into wanting to start writing fiction back in 2014. I found the Horror Writers podcast, which he was hosting at the time, and I went out and I started listening to the show. Got some good advice from there, and decided to go out and try some of his books, and became a fan of his work. And then ended up emailing him eventually and just kind of connecting and doing one of the worst things you can do as a new author, which is say, hey, do you want to read my first draft I just wrote? Which is terrible to do. And
I did, and I don't, to this day, I don't know why.
Yeah. And he gave me some really good advice about my terrible, horrible first draft. And so our relationship kind of went from there. We quickly figured out that we had a lot of stuff in common as far as movies and books we liked and music we were into. There was a lot of commonplace with us as far as all that stuff goes. So that's kind of how we met.
That's cool. And obviously you synced up, you connected in a brilliant way. How do the collaborations work for you guys? Is it different for different books, or do you have a system you use for everything?
We kind of have a base system, and it's or a process, I should say. And what it's based upon is the strengths that Zach and I both bring to the table, which is an important part of collaboration. You want to collaborate with people who have a complementary with different skill set. And in our case, I really, the first drafting process is not my favorite part of the writing process. I really prefer revision, although, I do first draft and I have written books myself, but I really, really sort of dig into the revision is my, my sweet spot. And Zach is sort of the opposite. He really likes to first draft and sort of get it out fast and furious and then not have to, look at it again. So because we kind of bring those strengths to the table, it allows us to build a process around that. And it's ever changing and evolving, and we've done it slightly different every time. But basically what we do is we have a story meeting, and we talk about the story idea, what are going to be the main components, the themes, the characters, that kind of stuff. I'll sort of draft out the 15 obligatory scenes because we kind of really believe in the story grid methodology for storytelling. Kick those back to Zach. We'll bounce the outline back and forth a few times, and then he'll start drafting. And then as he's drafting, I'm coming up right behind him on revisions, like a day to 3 days behind. And so we use just straight up Google Docs. And what that allows us to do is we have both of our heads in the story, in the same part of the story at the same time. So that if we're always in sync, we didn't start out this way, but now this is how we do it. We're always in sync. Neither of us are getting too far off the beaten path as far as the story goes, which is important because we're both independents. We're paying our bills with this. We can't afford to waste words or waste time.
Cool. Now, because I know you guys have talked about this on your podcast, but I want to make sure my listeners are familiar with it. So, when I hear story grid and when a writer hears story grid, they go, "Oh, that sounds like math," and I'm scared of that. And I know it's not. Can you just give a high-level overview as what is story grid and the way that it helps you with the formatting of your writing?
Yeah, I mean, this is a bit awkward. I'm not saying this because I'm a story grid editor, but story grid really changed my career. I mean, it completely changed the way I tell stories. And I think the biggest misconception people have is that it's this mathematically based algorithm that you start with, and it cranks out this cold story, and that's not what it is at all. Okay. It's a methodology. It's developed by Sean Coyne, who was an acquiring editor in New York City for 25 plus years. He developed this over all of those years because he was purchasing and editing the biggest authors in the world for decades coming out of New York. And he had a problem. He couldn't telling a writer I don't know, I just don't feel this. like you can, as an editor, you can tell a writer that, but it doesn't help because what do they do with that? And so what his methodology allowed is it's an analytical framework that allows you to take a look at a story in any phase, whether it's first draft or published work, and using some very common things that have become evolutionary storytelling aspects for thousands of years to pinpoint, like, here's a problem. Like, for example, you don't have an inciting incident here. The inciting incident has to be the moment that pulls the protagonist out of their day-to-day life. Like, well, if you don't have that, a reader isn't going to say you don't have an inciting incident, but they're going to just kind of bail, or they'll say, I don't get it, So I think, what the story grid is, and you can boil it down to some very basic components, and maybe Zach can chime in on that because that's sort of what we've been working with, some of the core concepts to story grid. But all it allows you to do is to analyze your story and make sure you have the stuff in there that readers expect. And that's consistent, whether it's fiction, nonfiction, genre fiction, it doesn't matter.
Okay, thank you. That doesn't sound mathematically scary anymore, does it?
It's totally.
The 5 commandments is as mathematical as we get, right, Zach? I mean, that's there are 5 basic components to the story grid story structure. It's inciting incident, progressive complication, crisis, climax, and resolution. Basically,
the other. Go ahead. Sorry. Yeah,
go ahead.
The other thing to remember is that the story grid is not an outlining method. It is a editing and diagnostic tool. It's a revision tool.
Like an afterwards tool. Right?
Yeah. Now we have turned it, like what we've done is we have turned it into the way we outline just to save us some work on the back end. Because for us, we're like, well, if we can identify what our obligatory scenes are, what our polarity shift is going to be in each scene, then it goes back to what Jay said, like we save words and we save time. So we've kind of turned it into the main concepts of story grid into that for us. But at its core, it's a revision and diagnostic tool. So
okay, that's cool. Thank you. So and you guys, you started your new podcast this year, 2018. I believe it was 2018 that you started it. So you're collaborating on writing. You're collaborating on something we're going to talk about in a little bit of traveling, but you're also collaborating on a weekly podcast. And the format you guys have chosen is really interesting. Like where it's like the multiple choice and what you're going to talk about, and then you dig into that. How has the podcast changed or added to the way that you guys meet regularly and collaborate?
You want to answer that one, Jay, or?
I sure will. This was Zach's idea, and I fought him for months and months on it because we did. I started the Horror Writers podcast by myself. I had Richard Brown as a host for a while, and then Zach came on, and then Zach and I kind of felt like it ran its course. Like we didn't feel like we could take it anywhere else. And at that point, I wasn't soured on podcasting, but I was basically saying, like, I'm not interested in doing another writing podcast. I'm like, there are so many good writing podcasts. I'm just not interested. And I don't know. I think it was, well, we're going to talk about Authors on a Train, but I think there was a moment in our first Authors on a Train retreat last November where I had this realization that, like, Zach and I do have a different voice. Like we are doing things that people might find helpful. And, if we put it out there and try it, no one listens, then, there's nothing lost because it was stuff we're talking about anyway, stuff we're talking about behind the scenes. So I resisted him for a long time on it. And then, and now that we're doing it, it's one of my favorite weekly activities. I look forward to it every week.
That's great.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we actually, with the way our systems work, like we actually don't have a lot of meetings like during the week, like on Skype. We use Slack a lot to contact about stuff. So like really it kind of becomes our standing meeting. Like we, where we get to, we'll spend a few minutes before and after like discussing things, but then like that's kind of our shop talk time is when we do that podcast. So.
Yeah, so you're talking about the latest news and what's going on in the industry, and so you get to and I like that you pick the one that you want to talk about because well, this has already been done to death, so let's just do this one.
Right.
Yeah. I totally stole that from a video game podcast. So that idea of doing the headlines and choosing ones, and it kind of gave us a different spin in the the writing podcast space. So.
And I know, and I think you do this for your Patreon supporters, but you do analytics of a movie. So maybe a movie that everyone's seen, or a movie you haven't seen yet in some cases. And you guys break it down and you apply the story grid so they can actually see, because not everyone's read every book that you're talking about, but it's easier to watch a movie in 2 hours. So I think that's a great way to showcase what you're talking about in examples that people can actually share.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, that was, to become a story grid editor, I had to go to Nashville, and I spent a week with Sean Coyne and Tim Grahl there, along with 18 other people who wanted to become story grid editors, and it was intense. Like it was like 8 to 8 every day. Sean packed a ton of stuff in there. Right. Sean's brutal in a great way. But one of the things that we did multiple times a day was scene analysis. And we did scene analysis with short stories, with chapters from novels, with television shows, with scenes from movies, and sort of getting this well-rounded perspective on what makes a scene work and therefore what makes a story work. And it's such a great idea because you can immediately use that deliberate practice to get better. And when Zach and I were talking about, well, okay, now we have the podcast, but what can we offer people that's going to be a bonus? And the two things we came up with right off the top that felt really good and played to both of our strengths was the movie bonus and me sort of leveraging my story grid experience in that realm. And then the other one is the Amazon product page makeover, which is where Zach really shines in sort of looking at the sales page and optimizing that and right. Fine tuning it.
That's cool. That is fantastic. So we've alluded to it. We've teased people enough, but let's get on the train. 2 years ago, you and Zach and Lindsay Broker and Joanna Penn came together in Chicago. Tell us a little bit about that trip.
It wasn't even 2 years ago. It's just over a year ago.
Was it
feels a lot longer.
It feels like 2 years. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I was thinking.
I know what you're saying though. So.
But it's because you're about to do your third one this year, right? As I understand it, or.
Yeah, it'll be the second one we host, but it'll be our third trip.
Oh, see, I can't do math. That's the problem. It's going to be the second Authors on a Train that you host. But so how did that happen? What were you guys up to there?
Go ahead, Jack.
Well, you're the one who sent the magic tweet out.
Yeah, the now legendary tweet, which I can't say for sure or not. It exists. I should probably go back and check. I think it does. I was tweeting about a cross-continent train trip that I had done, which I did for my day job for a number of years, from Chicago to San Francisco and back. And I was tweeting about it, or a picture, and I was saying, I wrote 30,000 words on this trip, and Lindsay Broker said, "Oh, that sounds really cool." And I'm like, "All right, well, let's do it." And right on Twitter, and that's kind of how it started. And I, having co-written with Joanna, I knew she would also be someone who would be a really up for that. And And I also sort of had this idea of I wanted to bring sort of 4 diverse writers together too. I didn't just want it to be a bunch of my friends hanging out. Although Zach and I were friends, but Lindsay and Joanna bring totally different voices and audiences and perspectives. And so it all just came out of that. And I think both of those women and Zach, although he can speak for himself, I think they thought it was a unique enough experience that, taking the overnight train from Chicago to New Orleans and then co-writing a story while we're there and then publishing it a few weeks later, they were yeah, that's never heard of that. Let's do it.
Dynamic new digital publishing world we're in. And then you guys then took this because so many other authors watched this and went, I want to do that. I want to do that. So you guys started hosting Authors on the Train. So how does that work for an author who's interested in joining the voyage?
Yeah, it's easy. Then go authorsonatrain.com, and we have a little form there where you express some interest, and you have to fill out a little application. We're very selective, not being snobby about it, but we only take a dozen or so people. It's a very intimate sort of low scale. It's not a scalable type of thing. We can't do this with 100 people. It's not what we're trying to do. Right. What we're trying to do is trains
across America. Probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Authorsonmanytrains.com. But the idea is to get really in it with people, and it's more than just the writing. You have the city, which offers so much in the terms of arts and music and entertainment and the food. But we also run workshops, and we talk about publishing and marketing and social media, and it's a very fully intensive whole we're approaching the whole writer, and I think the important thing too with Authors on a Train is that we have a common goal. we publish an anthology when we come home, and so there is sort of this, because you can go on writers retreats and you can kind of kick back and not really do a lot and still convince yourself that you were on a writers retreat. But but on ours we're going to make you write, and there's a goal to it.
So you have I think the Dark Shadows was the first anthology. Was that the name of it that you guys had
Correct.
published from the last or the first the official authors on a train trek after the beta release? Because you guys had done a novel the first time, and then this other time because there were so many other voices, a themed anthology that you worked on. And so for people listening, there are still openings for this fall for the authors on a train.
Yeah, there are. We sold out 2017, and we have several people signed up already for 2018. So it's definitely, there are definitely spots available. But like we said, we're not blowing this up like a conference. There aren't many spots. So get in touch, and it's a completely personalized, hands-on experience. Like the men behind the curtain are Zach and I. So like when you fill out the form, it's not going to some bot somewhere,
editorial assistant in India, maybe. It's
no VA, it's us, and like people are a little surprised because anyone who fills out an application, I set up a Skype meeting with them, and they're always like, "It's you?" I'm like, "Well, who else would it be?"
That's hilarious, but that's not enough. Apparently, doing that isn't enough, because when you guys announced this really awesome thing that's going on in October in Pittsburgh. I jumped at that. After I wiped the drool off my face, I thought, oh my God, we're going to where that first Dawn of the Dead movie was filmed, and you guys are doing. Tell us about Night of the Writing Dead.
Oh, I don't, Zach, you start. I feel like I'm just running at the mouth here. You start.
So Jay loves to come to me with crazy ideas. And it's actually one of the really good things that works in our partnership, because the ideas that end up coming out are never what they start as, because I rope him in a little bit. Okay, we got
a lot.
A lot. So what Night of the Writing Dead is not what it started out, but what it is it is a weekend where we will be spending with dozens of other authors, zombie fanatics, artists. Like this is it. We are technically calling this a writer's retreat, but we also feel like this event appeals to people who, whether don't write at all or don't write zombie stuff or don't, have interest in writing that. Just because, it's the 50th anniversary of Night of the Living Dead, which is worked out perfectly. It's in Pittsburgh. We're outside Pittsburgh, where Romero's most popular films were made. And there's going to be a lot of really cool stuff going on in Pittsburgh celebrating the event around then. But the idea of this, the cool thing is that there is a goal attached to this as well, just like with Authors on Train. So, there's going to be a big world building summit where we're going to be, everyone who shows up live is going to be in a room together. We're going to be kind of building this world out. And then everyone is going to, if they want to, encouraged to write stories in this world we build. And we're going to publish that into an anthology that will then go up for sale. And it's going to be a lot of fun. It's definitely something we're really looking forward to.
Yeah. It's really a very personal and emotional for me, because I grew up in Pittsburgh, and as a teenager, I walked Monroeville Mall where they filmed Dawn of the Dead in the 70s, and that's right there. And so I was able, I still have a lot of family there. I live in Cleveland now, which is a few hours away, but I still have all my extended families in Pittsburgh. So went back, and we're hosting this in Lawrenceville, which is like a really trendy part. It's one of the nation's most trendy neighborhoods. We rented out the Row House Cinema for the weekend. So
cool.
We're going to have a showing of the film on Saturday, a private showing in a theater on Saturday night. And there's going to be a lot of other sort of zombie-related celebration and events around this 50th anniversary. And, it felt like the type of thing that we could only do once. We're not going to do the 51st anniversary. That'd be kind of lame. I don't know why, but it would be lame, right?
It's a nice round number, right?
Yeah. 50 really works. And so we're like, yeah, you know what? Let's try it. We took a bit of a risk, and sort of we had to put some money down on the theater and some of the other stuff first, but we felt like it was a unique enough experience, and quite honestly, it's really affordable. I mean, Authors on a Train is a pretty much premium experience. It's a long-term investment in an author's career. Whereas this weekend, you can show up for a few $100 and be part of something super cool. And if you don't ever write a word, you just want to come for the experience, you can totally do that.
And that's cool, and that also brings a little bit more diversity to it too. It's not just a bunch of writers, but it's writers and fans of zombie, whether it's movies, whether it's literature, whether it's whatever. That's quite exciting. I know. I was pretty pumped when I saw it, and I was looking forward to chatting with you guys about that. So, I mean, you guys just got back from the Somewhere Book Show summit that you sort of co-hosted with Jim and Brian from the Somewhere Book Show. And then you've got the Authors on the Train. You've got the Pittsburgh weekend. It's almost like this is like, hey, how can we hang out together more, the two of us? How far apart are you guys actually? Because I'm not. I think Jay, you're probably closer to my time zone, and not too far away from where I am, near Toronto, Ontario. But Zach, I'm not familiar with like how far away you actually are.
Yeah, so I'm in Nashville, which is I think when Jay drove down here, it took you about 10 hours, right?
Yeah, something like that. Mm-hmm.
For when you came down here for Story Grid. Yeah, it's actually, it really works out for us because, we really believe in these in-person meetings. We've talked about that a lot, like things like Night of the Writing Dead, things like Authors on the Train, like those things happen. They didn't happen over Skype. Those things happened when we met in person.
Right.
Authors on a Train happened before that whole concept came up, before we went to a metal show and we were sitting out on a patio outside, like eating dinner together, and Night of the Writing Dead came together in a hotel room in Cincinnati. So Cincinnati is about halfway between us. And so that's where we'll meet periodically, like once every few months and hash this kind of stuff out. And that's where all our big ideas, the big books we're going to write, like all that kind of stuff, like it all happens in person.
So I want to talk about that in-person thing, because I mean, you guys are, you've made a career as authors leveraging digital. And I know you do create print books, but I'm pretty sure that the majority of your money is coming from digital purchases, digital reads of digital content.
Yes.
Why then do you find such value in the in-person experience? Because it almost would seem like, well, if everything else is digital, can't we just connect over Zoom or Skype or whatever? Why is that? What's the value in that in-person connection?
For me, it's really hard to articulate. I'm not really sure. I mean, I know that I know great things happen when Zach and I get together, and I know we have a blast when we come together. And in Chicago with Jim and Brian and all the other people who were there, and getting to meet new people, even as an introvert, like it was phenomenal. And it was there were just connections made, and it's not something you can quantify. Like I was saying to Rachel, my friend Rachel Heron, like even as like up to about 5 years ago, I had that same question. I'm like, why would companies send people on planes to fly to places for meetings when they can just do it over Skype? Like I don't get it. I kind of get it now, but I can't explain why.
Okay. Yeah, I'm in the same boat. And, I think Jay and I kind of had this realization when he was down here for the Story Grid thing, and I don't even remember what it was, that there was some big issue we were struggling with that we couldn't figure out what to do. And we'd had several Skype meetings, but like we literally sat down and had coffee together at this coffee shop in Nashville, and we're just chatting. And then all of a sudden, like because we were there in person, we were able to figure this situation out. And that's when it hit us. Like we would have never come to this conclusion if we were just sitting at our desks and we weren't like it's like Jay said, you can't quantify it. But we have enough evidence to say that every single big idea we've had, or our story, the next story we're going to write, like all that stuff's happened in person, and we are 100% sure that it would not have happened if we weren't in person together.
Yeah, and I think it has something to do with the fact that a lot of that stuff happens on the fringes in places where you don't plan for it. Like what Zach's talking about is we had a plot issue or something, or a character issue we couldn't quite figure out. And if we had planned a Skype, or we had set up an appointment on our shared calendar that said, fix the plot problem, and we were saying, okay, we're going to come to Skype and that's what we're going to do, like it might have just dragged on and on. But like I don't even think we were talking about that. We might have just been having coffee. And like, I think like that's what happened too, like in Chicago. Yeah, I mean, there are great presenters and great talks. but there's all this other stuff that happens on the edges, on the periphery. People chatting over a drink, people going to dinner together, people just talking in between sessions. Like, there's a lot of magic. It sounds hokey, but there's a lot of magic that happens there, and you just can't replicate that in the digital world.
Yeah, I think there's some serendipity. I mean, you're in a restaurant and a song comes on the radio that, you know, no one would have had on a playlist that you were playing in the group, and then something in that sparks something in the conversation that leads to the next book idea. You never know, right? It just comes out of this weird connection. So I mean, I certainly get that. So I want you guys to share what are a couple of your most recent releases that you guys have just put out that we can share with listeners who want to go check out your stuff.
Yeah, so our latest book is the second book in the Baron series.
Okay.
We've got that one out, and that's the latest thing. That we're currently working on a follow-up to Arrival, which was the first book in our War for Earth series. It's like an alien invasion, post-apocalyptic book, and we have several other things in the pipeline.
Okay, cool.
But that's kind of the main thing we're working on right now is the War for Earth series.
Yeah, and if people are interested in, I know sometimes readers are a little leery if, you know, a series has been started but not finished. But so if you're into the binging, yes. We have a series called The Final Awakening, which is a trilogy. It's completely done.
It's completed. Okay.
Yep, race through it.
Awesome. And Escape from the Ruins is still in process or in progress, right?
Yeah, that's we're not sure when the third book of the Baron series is going to come out, but it's definitely on our production schedule, and we have that series, and we have the War for Earth series that we're definitely going to close, and those are designed as trilogies, and then we have a few other things we're working on right now too.
Oh, that's cool. That's awesome. And plenty of other standalones and collaborations that you guys you're never busy, right?
Never.
All right. So where can readers find out more about you guys, about your Career Author podcast, and obviously about your great collaborative author opportunities?
Yeah, I think the two easiest places, if you want to see our fiction stuff, moltenuniversemedia.com is where that all lives. And if you're an author and you want to check out our new podcast, the Career Author Podcast, it's at thecareerauthorpodcast.com. And I've found too, I've had to add a little asterisk to that, in that it is a Patreon page. That URL will take you to a Patreon page, but you can still listen for free on Patreon and on iTunes and Stitcher and all those other places. It's just, you know, we didn't want to necessarily create an additional website to manage for no good reason, and the Patreon website really seemed to serve our purpose, so we thought, let's just redirect to that.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for taking the time to hang out with me today.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. No worries. Yeah, yeah, but the face-to-face is coming in the fall.
It's coming finally, yes.